Commander Vexthor stood before the holographic display in the Grand Hall of Jarek Prime, his forearms crossed in a gesture that conveyed both interest and careful consideration. The projection showed a modest planet on the outer rim of the Telen sovereignty, a world called Arcturus VII. The contract details floated beside the image in glowing text that promised substantial payment for what appeared to be routine work. The client representative, a thin Telen diplomat with pale blue skin and large dark eyes, wrung his hands nervously as he waited for Vexthor's response. This alone should have been a warning sign. The Telen were known throughout the galaxy as calm, calculated beings who rarely showed emotion in business dealings. Yet this one seemed anxious, almost desperate. "Triple the standard rate," Vexthor said, his voice a deep rumble that echoed through the stone chamber, "for a simple suppression operation against a mining colony. You will forgive my suspicion, but such generous payment suggests complications you have not mentioned." The diplomat's eyes darted to the side before returning to meet Vexthor's gaze. "The colonists are human," he said quietly. "Perhaps you have heard of them." Vexthor had indeed heard of humans. They were a young species, barely 3 decades into their membership of the galactic community. They had arrived in ships that were crewed by galactic standards, held together with what more advanced species considered primitive materials. Their technology lagged behind most spacefaring civilizations by several centuries. They were small compared to species like Vexthor's own Kalrathi people, lacking natural armor, claws, or any obvious physical advantages. "I am aware of humanity," Vexthor replied. "They are new to the stars, physically weak. Their technology is outdated. I fail to see why this justifies triple payment." The diplomat seemed to shrink further into himself. 3 other mercenary companies have declined this contract," he admitted. "We are running out of options. The rebellion on Arcturus VII has lasted 6 months already. Our own security forces have proven insufficient." Behind Vexthor, his second-in-command, a lean and deadly Zerathi warrior named Cross, made a clicking sound that indicated concern. "Commander," Cross said in their private channel, "perhaps we should investigate why other companies have refused." Vexthor dismissed the concern with a wave of one hand. The Kalrathi Blades had never failed a contract in 47 years of operation. They had fought in over 200 campaigns across 3 sectors of space. They had defeated warrior species bred for combat, crushed rebellions on a dozen worlds, and earned a reputation as the most effective mercenary company in the known galaxy. Humans were newcomers. They had no reputation as soldiers. Their entry into galactic society had been marked by their eagerness to trade, their curiosity about other species, and their strange habit of forming emotional attachments to almost anything they encountered. They were not warriors. They were merchants and explorers, nothing more. "We will take the contract," Vexthor announced. "Prepare the standard expeditionary force. We deploy in 3 days." The Telen diplomat's relief was visible and immediate. He bowed deeply, transferred the payment advance, and departed with unusual haste. Cross approached Vexthor once they were alone in the hall. "I still have concerns," Cross said. "I took the liberty of researching the other companies that refused this contract. The Crimson Talons, the Void Reapers, and the Stellar Guard. All 3 are reputable organizations. The Void Reapers, in particular, are known for accepting any contract regardless of risk." Vexthor turned to face his longtime companion. Cross had served beside him for 20 years, had saved his life on 4 separate occasions, and had earned the right to speak freely. Still, Vexthor could not understand this hesitation. What reason did they give for refusal? Vexthor asked. "None," Cross replied. "That is what troubles me." The Crimson Talons simply stated the contract was not suitable for their organization. The Void Reapers said they had other commitments, though their ships have remained docked at Jarek Prime for the past 2 months. The Stellar Guard gave no reason at all. "Then they have grown soft," Vexthor said. "Or perhaps they fear damaging their reputation by fighting such an obviously inferior opponent. Let them worry about appearances. We will complete this contract, collect our payment, and add another victory to our record." Over the next 3 days, Vexthor assembled his strike force. 200 of his best warriors, drawn from 6 different species, each chosen for their specific skills and combat experience. There were Kalrathi heavy assault troops like himself, quick and agile Zerathi scouts, Dronic engineers who could breach any fortification, and Quillian snipers whose accuracy was legendary. They loaded into 3 military transport ships with enough weapons, armor, and supplies to conquer a small nation. Vexthor reviewed the intelligence reports on Arcturus VII during the journey. The planet was a mining colony, established 15 years earlier by human settlers. The population numbered roughly 50,000, spread across a primary settlement and several smaller mining outposts. The rebellion had started over a dispute about mining rights and taxation. The Telen sovereignty claimed ownership of the mineral deposits, while the human colonists argued that their labor and investment gave them rightful claim. Negotiations had broken down, and the humans had declared independence. The sovereignty had sent security forces to restore order, but those forces had been driven off after a brief engagement. This last detail struck Vexthor as odd. The Telen security forces were competent professionals, well-equipped and trained. How had untrained human miners managed to defeat them? The report offered no clear explanation, mentioning only that the security forces had suffered unexpected casualties and withdrawn to reassess their strategy. The journey to Arcturus VII took 6 days. During that time, Vexthor drilled his troops and reviewed tactical plans. The colony was built partially underground, taking advantage of the existing mine tunnels. This would complicate matters, but the Kalrathi blades had fought in confined spaces before. They had thermal imaging, motion sensors, and superior firepower. The humans had mining equipment and desperation. On the final evening before arrival, Cross came to Vexthor's quarters. The Zerathi carried a data pad which he placed on the commander's desk without speaking. "What is this?" Vexthor asked. "Information I purchased from a data broker," Cross said, "about human military history." "We know their history," Vexthor replied. "They fought among themselves on their homeworld before achieving space travel. Most species do. It is a natural part of development." "Read it," Cross insisted. "Please, Commander." "Before we land." Vexthor picked up the datapad, intending to skim it briefly to ease his second's concerns. What he saw on the screen made him pause. Dates and numbers scrolled past, detailing conflicts on Earth spanning thousands of years. The scale was staggering. Millions of casualties in single wars, decades-long conflicts, weapons designed specifically to maximize death and suffering. "This must be an error," Vexthor said. "No species fights like this." "I verified the information with 3 separate sources," Cross replied. "It is accurate. Commander, these humans have been at war with themselves for their entire recorded history. They know nothing but conflict." Vexthor set down the datapad. "Then they will know what it means to face real warriors," he said. "Their experience fighting each other will not prepare them for us. We are professionals. They are amateurs playing at rebellion." Cross said nothing more, but the worry did not leave his eyes. The next morning, the 3 transport ships entered orbit around Arcturus VII, and Vexthor gave the order to deploy. The landing operation went exactly as planned. 3 dropships descended through the thin atmosphere of Arcturus VII, their shields glowing orange as they cut through the sky. Vexthor stood in the lead ship, watching through the viewscreen as the main human settlement grew larger below. Intelligence had indicated roughly 20,000 inhabitants in this location, with defensive positions scattered around the perimeter. The dropships touched down in a cleared area 3 kilometers from the settlement. Within minutes, Vexthor's forces had established a defensive perimeter and begun their advance. 200 professional warriors moved in coordinated formations, their weapons ready, their sensors scanning for any signs of resistance. The first contact came sooner than expected. A group of humans appeared on the ridge overlooking the landing zone. Vexthor raised his optical enhancers and studied them. They were dressed in civilian clothing with makeshift armor plates attached. Their weapons appeared to be mining tools modified for combat, along with a few civilian firearms. Nothing that could threaten armored mercenaries. One of the humans raised what looked like a white cloth attached to a pole. The universal sign of parley. Vexthor ordered his troops to halt and activated his external speakers. "You are in violation of sovereignty law." His voice boomed across the distance. "Surrender immediately, and you will be treated according to galactic conventions. Resist and you will be eliminated." The human holding the flag lowered it. Even from this distance, Vexthor could see the smile on the man's face. Then the humans vanished, dropping below the ridgeline and disappearing from view. "Tactical withdrawal," Cross observed. They recognize they cannot win a direct engagement. Sensible, Vexthor agreed. Advance. Standard formation. Watch for ambush points. The Kalrathi blades moved forward. They reached the ridge where the humans had stood and found nothing but footprints leading back toward the settlement. The advance continued. Vexthor expected resistance at the settlement's outskirts, prepared fortifications and determined defenders. Instead, they found empty buildings and silent streets. They have retreated into the mines, a Dronak scout reported. Thermal imaging shows heat signatures in the tunnel systems below the settlement. This was actually preferable, Vexthor thought. Fighting in confined tunnels would limit the humans' ability to scatter and hide. His forces had the advantage of superior sensors and could trap the rebels in the underground passages. Send squads Alpha through Delta into the main tunnel entrance, Vexthor ordered. Squads Epsilon and Zeta secure the surface and prevent any escape attempts. Full sensor sweeps. Mark all heat signatures and move to capture or eliminate. 80 warriors entered the darkness of the mining tunnels. Their helmet displays lit up with thermal readings, motion tracking, and tactical maps. The tunnels were wide enough for mining equipment to pass through, with smaller side passages branching off at regular intervals. Perfect for an organized sweep. The first explosion came without warning. One moment, Squad Alpha was advancing down the main tunnel. The next, a massive blast tore through their formation. 12 warriors went down instantly, their armor shattered by a shaped charge hidden in the tunnel wall. The explosion had been precisely placed to maximize damage and was detonated at the exact moment when the squad was most vulnerable. Vexthor, monitoring from the surface, felt the first cold touch of concern. That had been a professional ambush, not the desperate act of untrained miners. All squads, weapons free. Advance with caution. Watch for additional explosives. But caution was hard to maintain when the enemy could be anywhere. The thermal sensors showed heat signatures throughout the tunnel system, but many of them seemed to be decoys. The humans had left heat sources in empty passages, drawing the mercenaries' attention while the real threats moved through cooler sections where their body heat was harder to detect. Squad Beta reported contact. Then their communications cut off. Squad Gamma found their bodies 10 minutes later, killed by precise rifle fire from concealed positions. The humans had disappeared before Gamma could respond. They are using the tunnels to their advantage, Cross said, stating the obvious. They know this terrain. We do not. Then we force them out, Vexthor growled. He ordered the Dronak engineers to begin sealing tunnel sections, cutting off escape routes and limiting the humans' mobility. If they wanted to hide in the dark, he would trap them there, but the humans had other plans. As the engineers worked to collapse secondary tunnels, more explosions ripped through the darkness. These were not random attacks. Each blast was calculated to cause maximum disruption, with minimal risk to the attackers. The mercenaries found themselves fighting an enemy they could barely see, who struck and vanished before they could respond. By nightfall, 37 of Vexthor's warriors were dead or seriously wounded. More than 30% casualties in a single day against an enemy that should have been vastly inferior. The troops withdrew from the tunnels and established a fortified camp on the surface. Vexthor stood in his command center, studying reports and trying to understand what had gone wrong. His forces had superior weapons, armor, training, and numbers, yet the humans had fought them to a standstill using improvised explosives and guerrilla tactics. Commander, a Kalrathi warrior entered the tent, dragging a human prisoner. We captured this one attempting to scout our position. The human was older than Vexthor expected, with gray hair and weathered skin. She wore no armor and carried no weapons. She looked at Vexthor with eyes that showed no fear, only a calm assessment that made him deeply uncomfortable. Name and rank, Vexthor demanded. Colonel Sarah Chen, the human replied in accented but clear galactic standard. Earth Defense Forces retired. Current civilian advisor to the Arcturus 7 Colonial Defense Militia. You are a soldier, Vexthor said, understanding dawning. Was a soldier, Chen corrected. 32 years of service. Fought in the Pacific Conflict, the Resource Wars, and the Australian Campaign. Been retired for 8 years now. Came out here to mine rocks and enjoy the peace? She smiled without humor. You interrupted my retirement. Vexthor studied her. Earth Defense Forces. Your planet's military. You have combat experience, more than I ever wanted, Chen said. And I'm not the only veteran in this colony. About 15% of the settlers served in Earth's military at some point. Another 20% have militia training. Most of the younger colonists grew up playing combat simulations and studying military history. It's a cultural thing. You are civilians, Vexthor insisted. Miners and farmers. You cannot possibly hope to defeat a professional mercenary company. Chen's smile widened. That's what I told them when they asked me to help organize the defense. I said we'd have no chance against real military contractors. But then I looked at your tactical approach, your formation discipline, your equipment. She paused. You fight like you're in a war movie. All the right moves for parade ground combat or clearing out pirates. But you don't fight like you've ever been in a real war. The Kalrathi Blades have fought in over 200 campaigns, Vexthor said coldly. Campaigns, Chen repeated. That's the key word, isn't it? Short-duration conflicts, border disputes, suppressing raiders. I pulled your company's records from the Galactic database. Your longest single engagement lasted 4 weeks. Most of your contracts are completed in days. She leaned forward, and Vexthor found himself leaning back despite his size advantage. Commander, humans have fought wars that lasted years. Not missions. Not campaigns, wars. The resource wars on Earth went on for 12 years. Continuous combat every single day across multiple continents. That's what war means to humans. You are trying to intimidate me with stories, Vexthor said. But he heard the uncertainty in his own voice. No, Chen said quietly. I'm trying to warn you. You have no idea what you're fighting. We didn't come to the stars to escape war. We brought it with us. Every tactical manual, every hard lesson, every dirty trick that humans learned in 10,000 years of killing each other. You walked into a fight with people who grew up studying military strategy the way other species study art. She stood, and the guards moved to restrain her, but she made no threatening moves. This is day 1, Commander. You lost 37 people today. That number is going to get worse. You can still walk away, break your contract. Take the financial hit. Because if you stay, you're not fighting miners who happen to rebel. You're fighting human veterans who know exactly what they're doing. And we're just getting started. Vexthor ordered her taken to secure holding, but her words stayed with him. He spent the rest of the night reviewing Earth's military history on the datapad Cross had given him. The more he read, the less he understood. Humans fought with a level of organization and brutality that seemed impossible for such a physically weak species. They had turned warfare into a science, studying it and refining it across millennia. Most disturbing were the accounts of human insurgencies and resistance movements. Groups of poorly armed civilians holding off professional militaries for years using the exact tactics the colonists had employed today. Ambushes, booby traps, hit-and-run attacks, psychological warfare. As dawn broke over Arcturus 7, Vexthor realized that Chen had been right about one thing. The sun rose on the second day of operations, and Vexthor called a strategy meeting with his senior officers. The mood in the command tent was subdued. Nobody wanted to acknowledge that yesterday had gone poorly, but the casualty reports were impossible to ignore. We need to change tactics, Cross said. The tunnel fighting favors them too heavily. I propose we seal all tunnel entrances and force them to come to the surface where we have superior firepower. A Dronok engineer shook his head. That will take weeks, and they have multiple secret exits we have not mapped. They can simply wait us out. Then we level the settlement, a Kalrathi captain suggested. Orbital bombardment. Reduce everything to rubble and force surrender. Vexthor considered this. It was certainly within their capabilities, and the contract did not specifically prohibit destruction of infrastructure. But something about the suggestion bothered him. Perhaps it was Chen's words from the night before, the certainty in her voice that they were making mistakes they did not understand. He accessed the Galactic database and began searching for information about human military doctrine. What he found fascinated and horrified him in equal measure. Humans did not just fight wars. They studied them. They had entire academic disciplines devoted to understanding conflict. They wrote books analyzing battles from thousands of years in their past. They created detailed simulations and training programs that prepared their civilians for war from childhood. A human child, Vexthor learned, was exposed to more tactical thinking through entertainment and games than most alien soldiers received in their entire military training. They played strategy games that simulated warfare. They watched films and read books about historical conflicts. They argued and debated military decisions the way other species discussed philosophy. More disturbing was the scale of human conflicts. Vexthor pulled up records of something called World War II. The numbers seemed impossible. Over 70 million casualties. Combat operations spanning 6 years across multiple continents. Entire cities destroyed. Civilian populations mobilized for war production. Most species in the galaxy had never experienced anything approaching that scale of violence. The typical alien war was a limited affair, fought over specific objectives with clear rules and boundaries. When the Kalrathi had fought their last major conflict against the Vryn Dominion, the entire war had lasted 3 months and resulted in approximately 4,000 total casualties on both sides. It had been considered a devastating conflict, studied in military academies as an example of how costly war could be. Humans had fought battles that killed more than 4,000 people in a single day. Some of their wars had killed millions, and they had fought dozens of these wars throughout their history. "Commander," Cross interrupted his thoughts. "What are your orders?" Vexthor looked up from the database. "I need to think. Deploy defensive patrols only. No offensive operations until I have reviewed all available intelligence." The officers dispersed, confusion evident in their postures. Vexthor had never delayed action before. He was known for his decisive leadership and aggressive tactics. But something about this situation demanded careful thought. The attacks began again that afternoon, not against the main force but against the supply lines. Human infiltrators destroyed 3 supply caches that had been hidden in supposedly secure locations. They sabotaged one of the dropships, planting explosives that detonated when technicians attempted to perform routine maintenance. 5 more mercenaries died. Then the psychological operations started. Speakers hidden throughout the settlement began broadcasting messages, not threats or demands, but something far more insidious. They played recordings of mercenary companies that had fought humans in other conflicts, the few such engagements that had occurred in humanity's brief time in the galaxy. Day 7, the Crimson Talons withdrew from New Hebron, a calm voice narrated. Casualties 43%. Mission failure. Contract broken. Financial losses exceeded 12 million credits. Company reputation damaged beyond repair. They disbanded 6 months later. Vexthor tried to jam the broadcast, but the humans simply changed frequencies. The messages continued, a relentless reminder that other professionals had faced humans and failed. Day 12. The Void Reapers attempted orbital bombardment of the Kepler Colony Rebellion. The voice continued. Human defenders had prepared decoy thermal signatures and hidden their true positions in shielded bunkers. The bombardment killed 0 combatants and united the previously divided human factions. The Void Reapers were forced to withdraw after sustaining 60% casualties in the subsequent ground assault. Vexthor's troops began showing signs of stress. The Zerathi, usually calm and focused, became jumpy and nervous. The Quillian snipers reported seeing human scouts in positions that should have been impossible to reach. Several mercenaries requested transfers back to the ships in orbit. On day 5, a Kalrathi patrol encountered what appeared to be a human child in one of the outlying buildings. The child was crying, calling for help in broken galactic standard. The patrol approached cautiously and the building exploded. 7 warriors died instantly. 3 more were severely wounded. The patrol leader, a veteran named Thrax who had survived countless battles, returned to base in shock. They used a child, he kept repeating. What kind of species uses their own children as weapons? Vexthor had no answer. He pulled up more human military history and found numerous accounts of exactly this kind of tactic. Humans called it asymmetric warfare. When facing a stronger enemy, they used every advantage they could find, no matter how ruthless it seemed. They had refined these techniques over centuries of occupation, rebellion, and resistance. The broadcasts continued. Human veterans average 4 to 6 years of active combat experience. Galactic military personnel average 47 days. Human tactical doctrine is built on lessons learned from over 10,000 years of recorded warfare. Galactic military doctrine is built on theoretical scenarios and limited border conflicts. Cross came to Vexthor's tent on the evening of day 6. His usually composed second-in-command looked rattled. "Commander, we need to talk about morale. The troops are asking questions. They want to know why we are still here. This does not feel like a contract operation anymore. It feels like a war of attrition that we cannot win." "We have superior numbers and equipment," Vexthor said, but the words felt hollow. Superior equipment that they are learning to counter, Cross replied. This morning, they disabled 3 of our scout drones using simple electromagnetic pulse devices built from mining equipment. Yesterday, they ambushed one of our patrols by predicting exactly where we would move, based on standard tactical doctrine. They are not just fighting us, Commander. They are studying us, learning us, adapting to us faster than we can adapt to them. Vexthor pulled up footage from the drone cameras before they were destroyed. What he saw chilled him. The humans moved with purpose and coordination that spoke of extensive training. They communicated with hand signals that looked military in nature. They set up ambush points with professional precision. These were not panicked civilians fighting for survival. These were veterans conducting a textbook insurgency campaign. Chen tried to warn me, Vexthor said quietly. She told me we did not understand what we were fighting. Should we request reinforcements? Cross asked. No, Vexthor said after a long pause. More troops will just mean more casualties. The problem is not numbers. The problem is that we are fighting a war the way we think wars should be fought. The humans are fighting the way wars actually work. He stood and walked to the tent entrance, looking out over the settlement. Somewhere in those buildings and tunnels, human veterans were planning their next move. They had studied the Kalrathi blades, understood their capabilities, and were systematically dismantling their effectiveness through tactics that had been proven in countless human conflicts. Pull all patrols back to the main perimeter, Vexthor ordered. Minimum exposure. We need time to reassess. The client will not be pleased, Cross noted. The client can hire another company, Vexthor replied. I need to understand what we are dealing with before I send more warriors to their deaths. That night the broadcasts changed tone. Instead of historical accounts, they began explaining human military theory. They described concepts like strategic depth, force multiplication, and psychological warfare. They explained how humans had learned to fight enemies that were physically stronger, better armed, and more numerous. Humans are not the strongest species, the voice said. We are not the fastest, the toughest, or the most naturally warlike. What we are is the most experienced. We have been refining the art of killing each other for our entire existence as a species. Every tactic you try, we have seen before. Every strategy you employ, we have countered in some previous war. You are not fighting humans. You are fighting 10,000 years of accumulated knowledge about how to win against impossible odds. Vexthor listened to the broadcast and realized Chen had been trying to do him a favor by warning him off. She had not been boasting or threatening. She had been offering him a chance to leave before the situation became worse. He looked at the casualty reports. 63 dead, 41 wounded, in 6 days. Day 47 brought a cold morning and the realization that Vexthor's company was dying by inches. Not in glorious battle, but through a slow hemorrhage of morale, effectiveness, and sanity. The casualty count had climbed to 119 dead, 78 wounded seriously enough to require evacuation. More than 60% of his original force gone, and they had not managed to capture a single objective or pacify a single block of the settlement. The humans had not even revealed their full defensive capabilities. They were toying with the mercenaries, teaching them lessons in humility and tactics. Every day brought some new demonstration of how thoroughly humans understood warfare. Vexthor sat in his command center reviewing reports that all told the same story. His forces refused to patrol at night after a squad had been wiped out by humans using night vision equipment and suppressed weapons. They refused to enter any buildings after 17 different structures had been rigged with creative and deadly traps. They refused to pursue retreating enemies after learning that every retreat was a calculated lure into predetermined kill zones. The Kalrathi blades, feared across 3 sectors for their ruthless efficiency, had become paralyzed by an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. It was as if the humans had written the mercenaries' tactical manuals and knew exactly how they would respond to every situation. Because, Vexthor had come to realize, they essentially had. Human military doctrine was based on fighting enemies who thought like the Kalrathi blades thought, professional soldiers who valued honor, discipline, and conventional military thinking. The humans had spent centuries learning how to defeat such enemies while outnumbered and outgunned. Cross entered the tent, and Vexthor immediately saw the signs of what humans called post-traumatic stress. His second-in-command's hands trembled slightly. His eyes darted to corners and shadows. He flinched at distant sounds that posed no threat. "Report," Vexthor said quietly. "We lost another supply convoy," Cross replied. "They hit it on the road from landing zone 2. Used improvised explosive devices buried in the road surface, then followed up with sniper fire. 12 dead, the entire supply load destroyed. The convoy commander said the attack lasted less than 3 minutes. The humans were gone before our quick reaction force could respond. Casualties among the humans? None that we can confirm," Cross admitted. "They left behind some blood trails, but every time we follow them, we find animal blood or synthetic markers. They are making us waste time and resources chasing ghosts." Vexthor nodded slowly. "Another lesson from human military history. Make the enemy expend energy on worthless objectives. Bleed them through 1,000 small cuts rather than risking decisive battle. It was a strategy humans had employed successfully for centuries against occupying forces." "There is something else," Cross said, his voice dropping lower. "The troops are starting to break. Not just stress or fear, Commander. Something deeper. The Zerathi are experiencing what their medical officer calls existential dread. The Quillians are having collective anxiety attacks. 3 of our Kalrathi warriors requested psychological evaluation after claiming to see impossible things." "What kind of impossible things?" "Human soldiers appearing in locations our sensors show as empty. Voices in areas where no one is present. A feeling of being constantly watched, even in secure locations. The medical staff think the humans are using some kind of psychological warfare technology, but we have found no evidence of such devices." Vexthor had a darker suspicion. The humans were not using technology. They were using the mercenaries' own minds against them. The uncertainty, the constant low-level threat, the inability to predict or counter enemy actions had created a state of psychological siege. It was another tactic from human history, used in conflicts where conventional victory was impossible. Break the enemy's will to fight, and victory becomes irrelevant. The enemy defeats themselves. "How many requests for transfer off-world have we received?" Vexthor asked. 47, Cross replied. "Almost a quarter of our remaining effective forces want to leave. I have denied all requests, but I cannot force them to fight if they refuse." And they would refuse, Vexthor knew. That was the genius of what the humans were doing. They had turned professional soldiers into frightened civilians, reversed the power dynamic so completely that the mercenaries felt like the hunted rather than the hunters. A communication alert chimed, and Vexthor activated the display. It was a message from the Tlen client, demanding a status update and expressing concern about the lack of progress. Vexthor ignored it. He had more important matters to consider. He pulled up footage from yesterday's engagement, watching it for the 3rd time. A Kalrathi patrol had encountered what they thought was a human defensive position. They had called in fire support and bombarded the location with everything they had. After the bombardment, they moved in to secure the area and found nothing but mannequins dressed in human clothing with heat sources to simulate body signatures. While the mercenaries had been focused on the decoy position, real human forces had attacked their supply depot 5 kilometers away. It was a classic misdirection, the kind of tactic that seemed obvious in retrospect but was almost impossible to counter in the moment. "They are not fighting to win," Vexthor said suddenly, the realization crystallizing. "They are fighting to teach." Cross looked confused. "Teach what, Commander?" "To teach us what war really is. To demonstrate that everything we think we know about combat is incomplete. We have fought campaigns, Cross, battles, engagements. We have never fought a war. Not the way humans understand the term." He pulled up the database information he had been collecting over the past weeks. Accounts of human military actions throughout their history. The patterns were clear once you knew to look for them. Humans did not just fight to achieve objectives. They fought to destroy the enemy's capacity and will to continue fighting. They accepted long-term conflicts because they understood that some enemies could not be defeated quickly. The galactic standard for warfare was based on limited objectives and minimal casualties. Most species went to war reluctantly, seeking quick resolution and negotiated settlement. They valued individual lives and avoided unnecessary violence. Humans had certainly learned to value life during their time in the galaxy. But their military doctrine came from a different tradition, one forged in conflicts where surrender meant extinction and defeat meant annihilation. They had learned to fight total wars, conflicts where every resource was mobilized and every advantage exploited. The colonists on Arcturus 7 were not even trying to defeat the Kalrathi blades in conventional terms. They were demonstrating that conventional defeat was irrelevant. As long as they maintained the ability to resist, the mercenaries would continue bleeding resources, morale, and lives. It was a war of attrition, and the humans were winning, because they had generations of experience with such conflicts. They knew how to sustain resistance indefinitely with minimal resources. They knew how to maintain morale when victory seemed impossible. They knew how to turn every disadvantage into a weapon. "I am breaking the contract," Vexthor said. The words hung in the air like a confession of sin. In 47 years, the Kalrathi blades had never broken a contract. It would mean financial penalties, reputation damage, and possible sanctions from the mercenary guild. But those consequences were preferable to watching his company destroyed piece by an enemy that was fighting a different kind of war entirely. "The guild will demand an explanation," Cross said quietly. "I will tell them the truth," Vexthor replied. "That we accepted a contract to fight humans without understanding what that meant. That we walked into a situation we were completely unprepared for. That continuing this engagement will result in the total destruction of our company." He began drafting the withdrawal order, then paused. "Contact Colonel Chen. Arrange a meeting under flag of truce. I want to speak with her before we leave." The meeting was arranged for noon in neutral territory, a clearing midway between the mercenary camp and the settlement. Vexthor arrived with minimal security, knowing the humans would honor the truce. They understood the rules of war better than anyone. Chen was waiting for him, looking tired but satisfied. She studied Vexthor with those calm, assessing eyes that had unsettled him from their first meeting. "You are leaving," she said. "Not a question." "Yes," Vexthor replied. "I am breaking our contract with the Telen sovereignty. We will be gone by tomorrow morning." Chen nodded slowly. "Smart choice. You lasted longer than I expected, actually. Most mercenary companies fold after about 3 weeks against human veterans. You made it to 47 days. That is almost impressive." "You were right," Vexthor admitted. "We did not understand what we were fighting. We thought this would be a simple suppression operation against untrained civilians." "We are civilians," Chen corrected gently. "We just happen to be civilians who spent our younger years learning to kill professionally." "Makes a difference. Why did you let us leave?" Vexthor asked. "You could have destroyed us completely." Chen smiled without humor. "We could have, yes, but that was never the goal. The goal was to make sure every mercenary company in the galaxy understands what happens when they take contracts against human veterans." 6 months after withdrawing from Arcturus 7, Vexthor stood before the Mercenary Guild Council in the Grand Chamber on Jarek Prime. The same chamber where he had accepted the contract that had destroyed his company's reputation and nearly broken his warriors' spirits. Now he stood here to give testimony about what had happened and why the Kalrathi blades had committed the unthinkable act of breaking a contract. The council consisted of 7 senior mercenary commanders representing the major guilds and companies. They sat in elevated positions around the chamber, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Breaking a contract was the most serious offense in the mercenary codes, and Vexthor knew they expected either a compelling justification or appropriate punishment. "Commander Vexthor," the council leader began, "a ancient Vryn named Executor Zarshan, you have requested this hearing to explain your actions on Arcturus 7. The guild has reviewed the basic facts. You accepted a contract to suppress a human colonial rebellion. You deployed with 200 warriors. You withdrew after 47 days with 60% casualties and 0 objectives achieved. Your client demands compensation for breach of contract. The guild requires explanation before rendering judgment." Vexthor stepped forward. In the past 6 months he had aged visibly. His scales had dulled, and there was a weight in his posture that spoke of hard lessons learned. Behind him, Cross and several other survivors from the operation stood as witnesses. "Honored Council," Vexthor began, "I broke the contract because continuing it would have resulted in the complete destruction of my company and the deaths of all my warriors. Not through overwhelming enemy force, but through tactics and strategies that we were fundamentally unprepared to counter." "The enemy was human civilians," one council member interrupted, "armed with mining equipment and improvised weapons. Your forces were professional soldiers with military-grade equipment. How could such an enemy force you to withdraw?" "Because they were not civilians," Vexthor replied. Not in any meaningful military sense. Approximately 15% of the colonists were human military veterans. Another 20% had received formal militia training. The remainder had been exposed to human military culture from childhood. We were not fighting untrained miners. We were fighting people who had spent their entire lives preparing for war, even if they never expected to use that preparation. He activated a holographic display and began showing footage from the operation. Ambushes, traps, psychological operations. The council watched in silence as the evidence mounted. This was not the disorganized resistance of desperate civilians. This was professional insurgency warfare conducted with textbook precision. I have spent the past 6 months studying human military history. Vexthor continued. What I learned terrifies me. Humans have been at war with themselves for their entire recorded history, not occasional border conflicts or brief skirmishes. Continuous brutal warfare spanning thousands of years. They have fought wars that killed tens of millions of their own kind. They have developed military doctrine through practical experience that dwarfs anything the galaxy has seen. He pulled up comparative statistics. The average galactic military professional has 47 days of actual combat experience. The average human military veteran has 4 to 6 years. When we fought the T-Land sovereignty in the border wars, the entire conflict lasted 3 months. Humans have fought individual battles that lasted longer than that. Another council member leaned forward. Commander, we understand that the humans have a violent past, but they are physically weak compared to most species. They have inferior technology. How does their historical experience translate to actual combat effectiveness? Vexthor looked at the council member for a long moment. Because war is not about physical strength or technological advantage. War is about understanding how to break the enemy's will to fight. How to use limited resources for maximum effect. How to turn every disadvantage into a weapon. Humans have spent 10,000 years learning these lessons through blood and sacrifice. We have spent decades learning theory in military academies. He showed more footage. Watch how they move. Watch how they communicate. Watch how they set up ambush points and select targets. Every action is based on centuries of refined doctrine. They are not improvising. They are following tactical principles that have been proven effective through countless conflicts. Cross stepped forward at Vexthor's gesture. I wish to add my testimony, Honored Council. I fought on Arcturus A7 and experienced what the humans call psychological warfare. They did not just fight us physically. They fought us mentally and emotionally. They broadcast information about previous mercenary companies that had fought humans. They explained their tactics while using them against us. They demonstrated that they understood our military doctrine better than we did. They were teaching us, Cross continued, his voice rough with remembered trauma, showing us how inadequate our training was compared to their experience. By the end, my warriors were afraid to patrol, afraid to enter buildings, afraid to pursue the enemy. We had lost before we even understood what kind of war we were fighting. The council listened as more survivors gave testimony. Stories of impossible ambushes, devastating traps, and psychological operations that had broken the spirit of hardened warriors. Each account added another piece to the picture Vexthor was painting. The humans on Arcturus 7 did not defeat us through superior force, Vexthor concluded. They defeated us by demonstrating that everything we thought we knew about warfare was incomplete. We were fighting by the rules of galactic military engagement. They were fighting by the rules of total war. We never had a chance. Executor Zarshan leaned back in his seat considering the testimony. You are asking the council to excuse your breach of contract on the grounds that the enemy was more capable than anticipated. No, Vexthor said firmly. I am asking the council to issue a formal advisory about contracts involving human military veterans. Other companies need to understand what they are facing. The Crimson Talons, the Void Reapers, the Stellar Guard, all refused the Arcturus 7 contract. I thought they were being cowardly or overcautious. Now I understand they were being wise. He pulled up data on other mercenary engagements with human forces. The pattern was clear and consistent. Mercenary companies that fought human veterans suffered catastrophic casualties and mission failures. Some had been destroyed completely. Others, like the Kalrathi Blades, had been forced to withdraw with devastating losses. Humans are not the strongest species in the galaxy, Vexthor said. They are not the fastest, the toughest, or the most naturally warlike. But they are the most experienced in warfare. They have made war their cultural heritage, passed down knowledge of conflict through generations. When we fight humans, we are not fighting individuals. We are fighting 10,000 years of accumulated military knowledge. The council members exchanged glances, communicating through private channels. Finally, Executor Zarshan spoke. The council will take your testimony under advisement. Return in 3 days for our judgment. Those 3 days passed slowly. Vexthor spent them reviewing more human military history and interviewing other mercenary commanders who had encountered humans. Every story was the same. Professional soldiers unprepared for the level of tactical sophistication that human veterans brought to combat. When he returned to the council chamber, he found it packed with observers. Word had spread about the hearing, and mercenary commanders from across the sector had come to hear the judgment. Executor Zarshan addressed the assembly. The council has reviewed all testimony and evidence regarding the Arcturus 7 operation. We find that Commander Vexthor acted appropriately in withdrawing his forces to prevent total destruction. The breach of contract is excused due to circumstances beyond reasonable prediction. A murmur ran through the crowd. Contract breaches were almost never excused, regardless of circumstances. Furthermore, the executor continued, the council issues the following advisory to all member companies. Human combat veterans represent a threat level disproportionate to their technological or physical capabilities. Companies are advised to exercise extreme caution when accepting contracts involving human military personnel. Initial threat assessment is upgraded from Tier 4 to Tier 2. Vexthor felt relief wash through him. Tier 2 was the classification reserved for the most dangerous military opponents in the galaxy. Putting humans in that category would make other companies think twice before accepting contracts against them. But the executor was not finished. Additionally, the council has received reports of another mercenary company engaging human veterans. The Obsidian Legion accepted a contract to capture a human research station in the Kepler sector. They deployed with 300 warriors in full military support. The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew the Obsidian Legion's reputation. They were one of the most aggressive and successful companies in the guild, known for their willingness to accept high-risk contracts. We received this transmission 18 minutes ago, the executor said, activating a holographic display. The footage showed chaos. Mercenary warriors in full combat armor fleeing through smoke-filled corridors, explosions, screams.